Hello, Year 9, and welcome to your next geography lesson. If you could complete as many of the questions on the board in 10 minutes as you can, that would be fantastic. Answers coming up on the next slide, but give them all a go. Give it your best. Even if you're not sure, write something anyway, and we'll check in just a second. Pause the video now. Okay, here are the answers. Please check through them. Make sure that you have them correct. If you don't, do please correct them as well. Don't just look at them. You're not likely to remember them that way. The act of actually correcting an answer is going to make you think about it a little bit more. Go back to the questions, look at them again, make sure that it really does tie up and you really do understand the answer. So 5 minutes at most to check. Pause the video now. Okay, copy the title, please. How does uneven development lead to international migration? Date it, read through the objectives, make sure you have the equipment ready, and we'll get cracking. Pause the video now. Okay, so we're talking about uneven development, the idea that some countries are more or less developed than others. We have, for example, one way of classifying that would be high income and low income countries, the two ends. And we're looking at how that situation leads to international migration. And we'll clarify that term in just a minute. So here are some key terms for you, 6 in fact. Could you copy them out with the correct definition? So, for example, if you thought migration was a person who moves out of a country, it is not. But if you thought it was, you would write something along the lines of migration is when a person moves out of a country. Or you could put migration, a little dash, and then a person who moves out of the country, copied straight from there. Anyway, over to you. 5 minutes at most to do that. Pause the video now. Okay, here are your answers. So migration is the movement of people from place to place. An immigrant is a person who moves into a country, and an emigrant is a person who moves out of a country. An economic migrant is a person who moves voluntarily. They choose to move to seek a better life, such as a better paid job. It's to do with the economy, after all. A refugee is a person forced to move. Notice the difference there. They don't have a choice. They're forced to move from their country of origin, often as a result of civil war or a natural disaster. It could also be things like persecution for their race, for their gender, for their sexuality, for any other reason why someone might be prejudiced against. And finally, a displaced person is a person forced to move from their home, but who stays in their country of origin. So essentially, they are in some ways homeless. So correct those if you've made any errors. Make sure you have those definitions correctly, and we will move on. Pause the video to do that, or we'll carry on now. Okay, so for each of those key terms, just to get us really thinking about those definitions, I'd like you to draw a picture to show what each key term means. Examples follow. I'm going to not talk about them, but I'm just going to show you them on the board. Is one example of migration, for example. You've got a house with an arrow showing the movement of the person to another house. I'm going to show you another example of that in a second. So grab your pencil out, try and stick to 1 minute for each drawing, keep them simple, keep them quick, and we'll move on. You can use mine, like I said, or you can come up with your own if you think you've got a better version. So here we go. Okay, so you should have both a definition and a picture for each of those key terms. Now let's look at a specific example of how uneven development has led to migration. And this is probably what is one of the largest current movements of people in the world, certainly one of the ones that's having the biggest effect on us here in the UK and on other parts of Europe. This is the Middle Eastern refugee crisis that started really in 2015, and we're talking specifically here from countries like Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, countries that have had war. So war here being the cause of this movement and a big factor in uneven development. Afghanistan, this mostly focuses on Syria, but Afghanistan is actually considered by a lot of people to be the only country in the world now to be still left in stage 2 of the demographic transition model. Remember, there were 5 stages from 1 to 5. 1 were tribal societies, and Afghanistan is about the only country still left in 2. Most other countries in the world are either 3 or 4, again with a handful of 5. So clearly there's some big development issues here, and Syria suffering greatly at the moment, Syrian people especially, from the civil war raging in that country since 2011, that is. So anyway, your task is to have a little read through this information, have a little look at the challenge article as well, and I've got a task for you on the next slide, which is going to need you to come back to this one in a minute, so hopefully that information is nice and clear. Pause the video now. Okay, so using that last slide, I'd like you to copy and complete this spider diagram. I have put on the amount of legs you need. You'll notice there is one cause for this from the article at least, for this refugee crisis, and I've picked out 5 effects. So pause the video here, go back to the last slide, and complete that spider diagram. Pause the video now. Okay, so some answers. So the main cause here is the civil war in Syria. Now, yes, there was Afghanistan and Iraq mentioned, so you could by all means have put those 2 on as well. But the rest of the textbook section there really does focus on Syria. And we have 5 effects, 5 consequences, you could say, of this civil war. High mortality on refugees crossing the Mediterranean. In Syria, at least 470,000 lives lost, and that figure's fairly out of date now, actually, so it's probably fairly a lot higher than that. Syria, 11.5% of the population either dead or injured. Again, that number will have probably gone up by now. 4 million refugees. Again, I'm sure that number has gone up by now. And high unemployment in refugee camps as another consequence. So there we go. Fairly grim reading there. Fairly bleak information. Very sad for those people involved. But this is the consequence of uneven development, and in this case, very specifically on civil war and the increased mortality rate, the increased pressure on people's living conditions, and the destruction of their homes and their society and their cities they live in the face of this war. Okay, a final task for you today is to think about the impact of international migration. Very contentious issue, something that's always in politics, something that's always in the news, the idea of migration. Some people have very, very strong opinions on both sides, that it's great and some people think it's terrible. Well, here's some positive and negative impacts of migration. So I'd like to read through all of those. This is really looking at it from a UK perspective, actually, and the idea that a lot of these migrants could very well, from around the world, end up in the UK. So have a little look through this. Very simple, categorize them as positive or negative. If I were you, the way I would do this is just to write a subtitle of positive, write all the ones down under it that are positive, and then the same for negative. You could draw a table if you want, present it nice and neatly, and that'll be great. So get cracking with that. It should take 10 minutes or so. Answers coming up in just a second. Okay, so here are the answers. The final thing I need you to do today for this lesson is to have a little look through this, make any corrections you need, just double check that you know the positive and negative now, and that's it. That is a very brief look at migration. It's a huge issue. There are many, many examples all over the world of it. It's an ever-changing issue. Brexit, for example, having changed the landscape of UK migration and will continue to do so. I know the government at the moment are talking about really trying to restrict the number of people able to enter this country quite greatly. Yeah, watch that space. We'll see how that changes. But a lot of people moving around the world, and the consequence, the reason for that is because of uneven development, because they feel like they would have a better quality of life or a better standard of living somewhere else in the world. And usually, if it's not because of being a refugee, if you're not forced out, it's a choice because you want to improve your life and essentially get a better job, earn more money, and have a better life in a society that maybe is a bit more wealthy and affluent. So there we go. Thank you very much for your time. Take care, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.